And then you get into a dangerous situation where you have a star player that is beloved by the fans, that people love around the NFL, who every single team in the league would want Justin Jefferson as their wide receiver one, or in their wide receiver room, however you want to say it. And you're getting into a really dangerous spot because he's got a contract. You know that if you let him walk, the fans are going to absolutely riot.
Welcome back to another episode of Georgeonsports with me, your host, George. I'm returning to the show. We have Trevor Sikkema, lead draft analyst of Pro Football Focused and host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. Welcome back to the show. And how are you, Trevor?
George, I'm doing great, man. I feel like it's been a while since we've gotten to chop it up and talk a little ball. So this is great, man. I appreciate you having me back.
And on that note, we've got a number of great games to actually talk about. And we're going to kick things off with my Indianapolis Colts, because no one thought we'd come out and beat the Ravens away in Baltimore. Or should I say we returned home to Baltimore. The Colts win this game in overtime, 22-19. The Colts now sit at 2-1, and the Ravens now sit at 2-1. I will say before this game, obviously the Ravens have a number of injuries, and they still have a number of injuries from top to bottom in their roster. They just can't quite catch a break, pun unintended. The Colts, on the other hand, are coming into the season as pretty much an underdog in every single game. We drafted the number 4 draft in the overall pick. Number 4 pick in the overall draft in Anthony Richardson, who is pretty much a freak of nature, a unicorn, tested off the charts at the combine. However, that doesn't always, transition to the field. I think it's safe to say that he is the quarterback of our future. We've had the QB carousel for so many years now, and it seems like we finally found our guy. Except he wasn't in this game because he was out with a concussion. Step in Gardner Minshew, who I have to say is one of the best backups in the game, paired in with Shane Steichen, the guy that he's very familiar with from the Eagles. And I think what needs to be said is this Colts defense, hasn't been spoken about enough. This defense ranks second in sacks, tied for 12. I think we probably have top 3 linebacker unit in the league. Our defensive line are hungry. I know our secondary is a little bit on the weaker side, but we've come to play. And in that game, although Lamar Jackson did scramble for quite a number of yards and scored 2 rushing touchdowns, everything else was pretty much shut down. And yes, again, there were injuries on the Ravens side, but as I say in the NFL, you can only play who's in front of you. And all you want to do is get that W. And obviously, the Colts get this win. A huge win, I have to say. A huge win in a bit of a rainy game. So I'm absolutely over the moon. But, for people who were watching this game, what were your thoughts in terms of how the Ravens and the Colts went to battle?
Yeah, so, I'll start with my thoughts kind of on Indianapolis. I think that Shane Steichen's doing an incredible job, man. And I think there's a lot of really good coaching going on around the NFL right now. We'll talk about Mike McDaniel in a little bit. And there's so much, what Sean McVay is obviously doing right now with that Rams roster. Like, there's just so much good coaching, it feels like, going on around the NFL. And Shane Steichen is one of those guys that deserves to have the nod. And this is something that I brought up on our little post-game podcast on the Stock Exchange. I'm so impressed with what the Colts were able to do this past week, because Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew are 2 completely different players. They play the same position, but they're 2 completely different players. And for the first 2 weeks in the season, I pointed this out. I loved what Steichen was doing with Anthony Richardson because he was simplifying everything, right? If you look at this guy and you go, man, he's so supremely talented, but he doesn't exactly know how to play the quarterback position at the highest level yet. Well, you don't want to just throw out everything to say, like, okay, here's how to play it at the highest level, go figure it out. No. You want to make it easy for him, especially so early on. He's gaining confidence, and he's actually able to show his strengths even early on in his NFL career. And for Richardson, Steichen has been doing that by giving him a lot of half-field reads, a lot of design rollouts, a lot of really creative opportunities for him to pick up yards with his legs that aren't dangerous or totally off script or anything like that. And it's just built his confidence up so much over these last 2 weeks. And so I was impressed with what he was able to do in the game plan he was able to form for a guy who is not only a rookie in the NFL, but also gives you that dual threat ability with his arm and his leg. You put Gardner Minshew in there, is totally different. Like, Minshew's not nearly the same rushing threat that Anthony Richardson was or is. And he's also a veteran in this league. So you can give him a little bit more full field reads, going through progressions a little bit more, those kinds of things. And so for Steichen to be able to have two completely different game plans the week prior to Richardson to what he was able to do with Gardner Minshew,
Yeah.
that was what was so impressive to me. And like that's a hint that you got the right guy at the top. So yeah, I think that the big standout on Indianapolis side was definitely what I saw from that offensive coaching staff. And then, hey man, Gus Bradley too is a defense coordinator. I think Gus gets a bad rap just because
Yeah.
of how things happened in Jacksonville, right? I mean, it's always tough when you're the face of a franchise that doesn't play well and your tenure there doesn't go well. And I think that people talk. Just think of Gus Bradley and just like, yeah, a guy of the past, basically.
Yeah.
Like Seattle, Legion of Boom, fine, but like he's not really a good head defensive coordinator anymore. He is. Like I think the same thing with Dan Quinn, right? People look at how it did not end well for Dan Quinn in Atlanta. He ends up getting fired. They have to move on, and we're sitting here like, whoa, look at the Cowboys, best defense in the NFL. Well, of course, they're orchestrated by one of the best defensive minds in Dan Quinn. How soon we forget these guys actually know a thing or two about the game. So Colts playing really well. I was scared to be super optimistic about the Colts just because you are starting a rookie quarterback. But part of me did go into this season thinking, look, I don't think the Tennessee Titans are going to be very good this year.
Mm-hmm.
And the Houston Texans are obviously a long way away from competing. They're on the right path, but they're a long way away. People just kind of crown Jacksonville as the team to win that division, where I also picked them to win the division.
Mm-hmm.
The Colts were by far the favorites to win the division last year. And if it weren't for catastrophic quarterback play, they probably would have done that. And so I just feel like, again, we were very quick to write off the Colts like, all right, we don't have to worry about them anymore. Forget this. It's Jacksonville's division. And I think they showed you this past Sunday, especially, that this is still a good roster. It's still a good team, and it's still a good coaching staff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you kind of hit everything on the head there. Shane I think he has transformed that culture. Very different to what we had with Frank Reich, who possibly had a bit of an older kind of mind and an older kind of way of looking on things. But just some of the guys on this team, in particular defense, Zaire Franklin, who is just lighting the league on fire.
Playing well,
he's playing absolutely lights out. But guys like Kwity Paye and Samson Ebukam, who we traded for from the 49ers, and Dayo Adengbe, there are so many guys on this team who. And during training camp and preseason, the reports coming out weren't too great because we weren't seeing much from this same defensive squad right now. Lo and behold, the season starts, and I know we lost our first game, and that continues to be something that we need to work on because it's been, I think, 11 years since we've won our opening game. But we it's been 10 or 11 years since we've won our opening game.
Wow, that's a bad stat to have as a fan. Wow.
It's not great, and it happened to be the Jacksonville Jaguars, fellow AFC South rivals that we did lose to. But yeah, I wasn't expecting too much this season, given we're starting a new rookie quarterback. I just wanted 4 or 5 wins, but progression. I wanted to see progression and chemistry with Josh Downs, a new wide receiver, chemistry with Isaiah McKenzie. He's obviously one of our returners right now, and obviously Anthony Richardson, to see him develop. But I'm very happy where the Colts are right now. We go on and face the Rams on Sunday, and I feel good about that game. I really do. You mentioned the coaching at the Rams, and again, I agree with you. I think they've done some really, really good things that most people probably didn't see coming, considering Sean McVay wanted to leave and go and work in the media. And, that wasn't exactly rubbing off too well on his players. Lo and behold, I know they've lost a couple of games, but they look good. The Ravens, I mean, the holdout with Lamar Jackson, he gets his deal. It's strange because you could say pretty much all of the guys who signed their big money deals haven't had the best start to their seasons. Lamar and Jackson Ravens are 2-1, but they didn't look too good in that game. Lamar looked quite frustrated at times when he wasn't able to, go with the signature rush up the field. Guys like EJ Speed for the Colts were everywhere. Again, Zaire Franklin, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner. We just looked really good. But the Ravens, where are you at with the Ravens?
So obviously, kind of like you said at the beginning, it's unfortunate because we're again having a conversation about injuries with the Ravens on both sides of the ball, and that stinks. Obviously, I was expecting a lot of great things from J.K. Dobbins, and not having him in the running back lineup. Like, yeah, Gus Edwards is a veteran there, and he's a guy who's kind of come in and be a really nice fill-in running back before, but it's different. the thing that really stood out for me with the Ravens is I think Lamar's playing at a really high level. And I think that he's playing at an efficient level is the important thing. I think he's
Yeah.
seeing the field very, very well. I think he's very patient this year. Yes, he is still picking up yards and touchdowns with his legs, but it's not like that's his primary objective right now. I think that he's really allowing the defense to kind of show their hand before he is able to then do what he needs to attack them the most or in the
Yeah.
most advantageous situation. So I've really loved how he has seen the field this season. But I will say the offense still feels devoid of a go-to alpha player
Okay.
outside of Jackson, someone for him to deliver the ball to. Because when you look at their offense right now, they're spreading the ball out a ton. Rashad Bateman, Zay
Mm.
Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr., Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, like
Yeah.
all the backs out of the backfield, like they're spreading the ball out a ton. But it's those moments where you kind of like have to have a gotta have it, whether it is on third down or whether it's even a little bit earlier in the down. Maybe it's on second down.
Mm.
They just, to me, don't have that identity of, yeah, we've got a lot of like filler players, but they're a complement to the guy that we're going to build our entire offense around, especially in the passing game. Now, maybe that ends up becoming Zay Flowers. Some people, myself included, thought it was going to be Rashad Bateman. It hasn't
Mm.
really been yet. I know in the past it's been Mark Andrews. Are they
Yeah.
going to continue to do that with him coming back from injury? But you look at this Ravens game against the Colts, and certainly it's a hat tip to the Colts. I don't want to take anything away from them, but they're 5 3-and-outs from this Ravens offense. Just
Yeah.
it felt like it was either feast or famine. And I love Todd Monken, their offense coordinator. I got to cover Todd very closely when he was the offensive coordinator in Tampa
Yeah.
under Dirk Cutter. That's when I was a beat reporter there. So I got to watch him cook up an offense that had Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and OJ Howard and Cam Brayton and just a
Yeah.
ton of different options. And I really liked his approach to offensive philosophy and getting the best playmakers the ball in their hands. But it just still feels like they're in that phase of figuring out who that number one option is. And once they get that established, because I do think that player could still is on the roster.
Yeah.
Once you establish that, then I think things start to look more complete. Because right now it feels like it's just a bunch of complementary pieces, but they're not really complementing anything. They're not like there's not a north star to the passing offense right now with the Ravens. And I think that's why you see, all right, it's either a 9-play touchdown drive or it's a 3-and-out. And you hope that kind of it's somewhere a little bit in between, but more so on the, okay, we're extending drives, we're controlling the clock, we're able to impose our will on the defense. And I just think that's the biggest issue for me right now is the Ravens are missing that alpha player.
Yeah, I agree because I remember prior to the season, there were reports of the team just wasn't clicking, wasn't gelling. And I think you can kind of see that now on the field where you describe it really well. It's just not fluid right now. But again, that could be them down to adapting to a new offensive scheme. And you'd like to hope that they will come good. They've got the pieces, hopefully when they come back healthy, they make a run for that division title in that division. But we're going to move on to the next game here, which is a game that everyone's been speaking about, no doubt. It's the Denver Broncos, who are now 0-3, who lose a whooping 70-20 to the Miami Dolphins, who sit at 3-0. Now, I will say before we talk about this game, there was a chance for the Dolphins to break the all-time scoring record, which was 72 points. They needed to kick a field goal to make that 73 points. And, out of, let's say, respect or courtesy, they never went ahead and did that. Mike Daniels decided not to. If you ask me, if you've got all the way up to 70, hell, you got to kick that field goal, man. You got to get into the history books because I don't see why not. But this game, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa in particular, because I feel like he's been, the face of some very undeserved criticism as a result of injuries and concussions, and I know that's part of the game. But when you have a healthy squad, a healthy Miami Dolphins, the defense is looking good, and when you have a run game, which is something they haven't particularly had over the last couple of seasons, and all of a sudden these guys look unstoppable to hang up 70 points on. And then let's remind ourselves here: the Denver Broncos are coached by Sean Payton. This is the Sean Payton who had his own comments and opinions on Nathaniel Hackett's coaching style, only to surrender to 70 points. Now, some will say, okay, that's a team giving up. Who knows? But this game was, I mean, there's not much to say on the Broncos side aside from some highlight guys like Mims, who I think is the wide receiver, who I think has got a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
Javonte Williams is back from his horrible injury. It's great to see him on the field. Russell looks a little bit more loose, which is good. But
Mm-hmm.
man, 70 points is unheard of. Again, 1966 was the last time we had such a scoreline.
Yeah, and this is a Broncos defense that was top 10 in the NFL in EPA per play allowed last year. So it's like, it's not like this is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. I think the score to this game is just much more of a hat tip to what Mike McDaniel is doing in Miami than anything else. Like,
Okay.
it happened to be the Denver Broncos, but I don't want to say like it could have happened to anybody, but it felt like on that day, Miami was going to score more than 40 points. That I almost might be confident with. Like, no matter who they were playing, it felt like they were going to score a lot of points. Maybe some of the best defenses in the NFL hold them to somewhere in the 30s, but every single thing was clicking that day. Broncos have talent on the defensive side of the ball,
Yeah.
and it just didn't matter. I just look at what they were able to do, and it's astounding. You mentioned it. They scored 70 points, and there were 8 minutes left in the game. It's not like they scored 70 points like in the last second. There were 8 minutes left. They got another possession. Like, they could have, and their backups were in the game long before that. So it was one of those things where you do this stuff in Madden, right? You do. If I was in a Madden league with somebody and I logged back in to see how their game went and it was 70-20, I'd be like, okay, can you stop padding the stats unrealistically? Like, this would never ever happen, and obviously it did in real life. So this is a Madden game that came to life. For the Broncos, I did like the Sean Payton hire. Maybe this game was a little bit of karma for how harshly he went after Nathaniel Hackett when I don't think he needed to do that. Like, look, man, everybody knows it didn't go well last year. That's why you're here. That's why Hackett isn't. You didn't have to say this was one of the worst coach jobs in NFL history in order for the media to believe you that you're a better man for the job than Hackett was. I think everybody already knew that. And you took it a little too far. So maybe this was a little bit of karma, but it is one of these games where you listen to coaches and they say, hey, there's a 24-hour rule, right? You got 24 hours to sulk about the game and then it's done. It basically never happened. This is one of those games where you need to have that kind of a rule because you don't want it to get out of hand. You want to focus on the next week. You want to play a good game coming up. And you're playing an 0-3 team this week. So now is a really good opportunity to bounce back, get that first win of the season, and they need those guys to turn around. So for Denver, there's really not much of a takeaway other than you just got to let it go. You just got to let this game go.
You mentioned it. The Broncos' next game is against the Bears. That's a very interesting game because obviously they both are in 3. But are you sold on what you've seen from the Miami Dolphins, or is it still too early to tell the real Miami Dolphins?
No, I am absolutely sold on the Miami Dolphins as a team that they're not going to score 70 points every week, but like this is a team that can score against anybody. I already thought the defense was incredibly talented. Vic Fangio's doing a great job with that defense as their new defense coordinator. And I can only think what happens with this team when you get Jalen Ramsey back in November or December or whatever it's going to be. You're getting one of the best secondary players in the NFL added to this defense. And so for Miami, it kind of is what a lot of people say going into the season. Long as Tua is healthy, this team is dynamic. Because they scored 70 points. They didn't even have Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle didn't even play in the game. So it's just what they have done to put so many mismatches on the field at all times. I mean, Hill himself is an automatic mismatch, but then so is Waddle, so is Mostert, so is A-Chain, right? And it's just like
Braxton
no team in the NFL has the defensive speed to match what they're able to do. So to me, it feels as though until we see some defensive coordinator really play them a certain way or really get Tua off of his game, then it's basically just a matter of will Miami execute enough to win the game? Because they certainly have the horses to be able to do that.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's they're great fun to watch right now, and long may it continue because Tua's been through it, and I hope he deserves all the praise that he's getting right now. We're going to move on to another game that happened in week 3. Now, the Chargers and the Vikings. The Vikings are currently 0-3. The Chargers were on the the cusp of becoming 0-3. The Chargers win this game thanks to an interception. They're now 1-2, and the Vikings are 0-3. Now, I'm not a fan of what's going on with Brandon Staley and these Chargers because essentially, if you look at it, Staley was brought in based on his defensive credentials, in particular what he did with the Rams, and they've been anything but great defensively. Offensively, they haven't got an issue yet. They got rid of Joe Lombardi and brought in a new OC. You lose Austin Eckler, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal because it now changes how you play as a team. You've also now lost Mike Williams, which is another big problem. You have guys like Quentin Johnson who's going to have to step up, and Josh Palmer. But you flip the script. The Vikings, who started 11-0 last season, winning all those close one-score games, are now 0-3, and the rumors are flying. Do the Jets go after Kirk Cousins? Well, probably not, because they just signed Trevor Sikkema. I don't know if you saw, but Justin Jefferson actually earlier today raised my blood pressure because he shared a story about, I think he said something along the lines of, Anthony Richardson looks great. They've got a great team. I'd love to know what's going on over there. Something along those lines. And my ears kind of, when players start to put those feelers out there, they're obviously not happy. He hasn't signed his deal yet. I believe he hasn't been given a new deal as of yet. I know Kirk Cousins isn't going to be extended at the end of this season. So things are starting to feel a bit rocky. The Vikings aren't looking good in the run game. They've gone after Cam Akers. It's a bit of an ugly one for the Vikings. But
yeah, the Vikings are in a tough situation. I figured that they were going to regress, right? I had no reservations about picking the Detroit Lions to be the favorite in that division.
Oh, yeah.
I figured that Green Bay would probably be number 2 because Matt LaFleur is a very good head coach. I didn't really know what the Bears were going to be because of their trench play, really. I mean, I believed in the receivers. Shoot, I even believed in Justin Fields a little bit.
Same.
But I felt as though the trenches were not where they needed to be, to where the Bears were either going to finish still 3rd or 4th, depending on how the Vikings played. And here's the thing. Vikings aren't even playing that bad. They're just giving the ball away. They're turning the ball over everywhere. They can't handle things the way that they need to. And yeah, they're losing a bunch of close games and people are going to point to the one-score thing, but it's not even really the one-score thing. It's just the turnovers. To me, it's not even about they're crumbling under the pressure when the games are tight. No, they're making the games tight just because they have so many turnovers. They should have beat Tampa in week 1. They just gave the ball away way too many times to where Tampa continued to capitalize on it, and they get away with the win. They get a road win there. And, against the Chargers, it felt like kind of the same story. And it just has been the same story all season long. So I agree with you. I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to be the starting quarterback for this team next year. I don't really know that you can trade him, because the only place that would probably trade what you would want to get for Kirk Cousins would be the Jets. Although I think that New England is kind of sneaky, but I don't think that they will. I don't know if they will do it. That's really just me kind of thinking of situations in my head. So ultimately, I got to feel like Kirk Cousins is probably going to still be on this team after the deadline. And then you get into a dangerous situation where you have a star player that is beloved by the fans, that people love around the NFL, who every single team in the league would want Justin Jefferson as their wide receiver 1 or in their wide receiver room, however you want to say it. And you're getting into a really dangerous spot because he's got a contract. You know that if you let him walk, the fans are going to absolutely riot. So then you get in a situation where, okay, you had such a downturn from the year before. Do you have to start saying things to him like, hey, we want your input on some players that we would bring in, some quarterbacks that we would bring in? Because that's dangerous, right? That's the stuff that felt like it got Baltimore, that it got the Broncos in trouble, or that it was the reason why Russ had a rift in Seattle. That was the reason why he left, because he wanted control. He wanted to basically be part of the decision-making. And they're like, no, we want you as a cornerstone of this roster, but we're not going to give you decision-making control. So it gets really sticky when that becomes a thing, especially when it's not a quarterback, especially when it's a wide receiver. So man, Minnesota's in a tough spot. I like Kwesi Adafo-Mensah, their general manager. He's going to have an opportunity to have a very high pick in this upcoming draft, because even though I think there's going to be a little bit of regression to the mean for them. They're not going to lose so many of these one-score games. I think they're going to be all right. They're still going to have a top 10 draft pick, which isn't something that happens often in Minnesota. And they're going to have the opportunity to reset the franchise with a new quarterback. So like Kevin O'Connell, I'm going to enjoy him getting to work with one of these young quarterbacks in a really exciting draft class that's coming up. But for this year, it's hard to look at this year and really think the Vikings are going to make much noise.
Yeah. And what's your thoughts on Brandon Staley and the Chargers? Because for me, I feel like there's a lot of heat under that seat, quite a bit of heat.
Yeah, and there should be. Yeah, I said this earlier this week as well. Justin Herbert is both the reason why Brandon Staley would keep his job, and he is also the reason why Brandon Staley would get fired.
Mm,
Because Justin Herbert is that good of a football player to where the Chargers can overcome really poor defensive play, like we have seen over the last couple of games. And we saw even last year, certainly. But when you are the general manager and when you are ownership, you got to be looking at Justin Herbert and thinking, can we do better at the rest of our team? Can we do better at head coach? Because we do not want to waste this dude. He is a franchise quarterback. He is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in this league. He can win you games at the very highest level. Do not support him with a head coach that you don't believe in, that cannot
yeah.
help you and be a CEO of the roster on both sides of the ball. And right now, it just feels like Brandon Staley is not that. He was hired to be that, and it just hasn't been for the last 2 years. So his seat is incredibly hot. Not sure it's hot enough for him to be like the first coach fired, when people
Okay.
place
Yeah,
bets
yeah.
like that. But man, it's getting harder and harder for me to think that he's going to survive beyond this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Trevor, before we close things and wrap things up, we're going to talk about the first London game that's happening at Wembley Stadium this Sunday between the Atlanta Falcons, who are currently 2-1, led by Desmond Ridder and the all singing and dancing Bijan Robinson, against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this is their home game at Wembley. The Jacksonville Jags are 1-2, losing to the Houston Texans in the weekend gone. Now, both of these squads are quite interesting. Again, you mentioned it earlier in the show. Jacksonville were expected to dominate this AFC South. Hasn't particularly gone that way so far. And the Falcons, obviously, everybody knew what their mantra was going to be. We're going to run this ball until, you guys basically quit. Here's my issue. I'm not so high on the Falcons like everybody else. And the main reason for that is outside of your run game, there isn't anything there. You have a guy in Drake London who isn't necessarily being utilized very well. You've got a guy like Kyle Pitts who everybody talks about from fantasy to actual NFL, nothing to show for it. And for me, part of this issue is Desmond Ridder. I don't feel like he's their quarterback to move forward. In fact, I'll go as far as saying they should have kept Marcus Mariota if this is how they were going to run this squad, because at least Marcus Mariota can throw the ball. Desmond Ridder is your average quarterback. I don't think he's going to be the guy to take things forward, and I'm really surprised that they never addressed that this off season. So the Jags obviously 1-2. The Falcons are 2-1. They're going to face off in London. Both of these teams wanting to have a win, and I think it will be a great game. But I'm going to go ahead and say I think the Jags win this game. I believe in Trevor Lawrence as a quarterback more so than I believe in Desmond Ridder, but I also believe in Doug Peterson more so than Arthur Smith in terms of coaching ability, looking at the roster. I mean, guys like Calvin Ridley, this has got to be a very big game. He's gone from the Falcons, had a whole year out, now he's with the Jags, and he looks like he hasn't missed a beat. What are your thoughts on this game?
I'd also be picking the Jags in this game, but I do think there are certainly reasons to believe that both sides could win it. First and foremost, I agree with you. Desmond Ridder is not playing well enough to just be a starting quarterback in this league. It's got to be better during the second half of the season and through the rest of this year if he's really going to keep off those quarterback conversations of them drafting somebody or bringing somebody in, because right now it just straight up has not been good enough. Now, something that is to their advantage in this game is the Jags have been horrible at getting after the passer so far this season. I mean, they've got one of the lowest pass rush win rates as a team. They've got one of the lowest pass rush grades in our system as a team, one of the lowest sacks, one of the lowest pressures. Like, they just simply cannot get after the quarterback. And if Desmond Ridder is going to have plenty of time to throw the ball, well, even some of the lower tier starting quarterbacks in the league can pick you apart, especially if you give them enough time for guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London and those types of players to get open. I feel like they can do enough there. So that part of it does worry me for Jacksonville. Can they get after the quarterback the way they need to? But on the other side, Jags had a really bad loss this past week. But when you look at it, Lawrence's receivers, it felt like, let him down quite a bit this past week. There were some key drops and just they just were not in sync the way they needed to be. I think that gets better this week. And I think there are less of those mistakes. So I believe this is going to be a very close game, but I will give the edge to the Jaguars because of the Trevor Lawrence factor. He's going to be the better quarterback in this game. And I just don't feel like the receivers are going to let him down as much as they have, especially what we saw last week. So with that in mind, I would take the Jags in this one. I think it'll be, something like a 27-24 game, something like
Okay.
that.
And it has to be said as well, it's the first time the Jags are playing back-to-back games, so they'll be here in London for 2 weeks, I believe. They're already here at the minute as we speak. They have the Falcons and they play again at Tottenham as opposed to Wembley. But Trevor, it's been an absolute pleasure once again to have you on the show. Are you hoping to maybe one day get yourself down to some of these London games?
I would absolutely love to, man. That would be so much fun. Maybe next year, if they keep expanding this and we have more and more London games, I got to figure out how to get PFF to fly me over there just to show face out there in a London game, because I'd absolutely love to do it.
Yeah, you wouldn't regret it. You wouldn't regret it. I'll tell you that firsthand. But Trevor, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Guys, make sure you listen to the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, which is hosted here by Trevor. It's an amazing show. You will not regret it. Lead analyst at Pro Football Focus. I've been George from Georgeonsports here with Trevor Sikkema, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.